Welcome once again to Along the Rio Grande. I'm George Torok, and today we're going to be talking with Mr. John Hunter. He's the director of the Public History Program at New Mexico State University. He's also the vice president of the New Mexico Heritage Preservation Alliance. They help promote and preserve historic sites in the area. He received his doctorate at the University of New Mexico at Albuquerque, worked with oral history sources, and did research on the community of Los Alamos. And he's been at New Mexico State University since 1995. Welcome to our program.
Oh, thanks, George. Thanks for having me here.
We're going to talk about public history today. We're going to talk about some of the opportunities in public history and what makes public history different from traditional history that we're accustomed to. Maybe we should start by talking about what public history is. What would be a definition of public history?
Public historians collect, preserve, and interpret history to the general public. So there are people who are working outside of the classroom to bring history to regular people.
And how is that different from the traditional type of history that we would study in schools or study in colleges?
Well, the history you study in college and schools are more, especially around here, you study textbooks that talk about the revolution, that talk about immigration into the East Coast. Sometimes the history doesn't really connect with local people. Public historians work closely with the region and with the community. So when we present history that connects with people. An example is that there is a museum that's being developed in El Paso that is about Mexican immigration into El Paso and into the United States from Mexico. El Paso was the Ellis Island for Mexican immigrants. So instead of studying immigration into the Ellis Island on the East Coast, which doesn't really connect with people here, we present the history of the people of this region.
And the sources would be a little different, right? You would look at different types of material to study that history. How would it be different from the way someone might traditionally write history in the textbooks that we're accustomed to?
The history the sources are about the same. I mean, history is history. You go to archives, you go interview people, and that might be a little bit different. Public historians do a lot of oral history. So we go interview people about their lives, and not just the kings and presidents, not just the political leaders, but just the everyday life of ordinary people. So that's maybe one difference in the sources. The other one is how we present it. As you know, academic historians a lot of times just talk to themselves and argue very obscure points to themselves. Public historians can't get away with that. You present a postmodern debate in a museum, and the public's going to say, what is this?
Right.
It doesn't connect with them. So public historians have to find ways to connect with their audience. Their audience is different.
How do they do that? How do they find a way to connect? Is it a different language? Is it a different style of presentation?
It is definitely different language. It's not the jargon of academics. It is a different presentation. We don't present as much in books as regular historians. We present in museums. We present our history in TV and radio programs. We present our history in just preserving an old building. I mean, in that regards, the building is the text.
And there seemed to be more cooperation, more groups of people working together on public history. It's not really something you can do alone, right?
Absolutely. The traditional historian works in an archive, does research, goes home, works on the word processor in a solitary manner, and then sends off the manuscript. It's a very solitary process, as you well know. A public historian works a lot more in committees. So we work together with a bunch of different groups of people, not just at the university level, but we work with community members. We did a project in Mesilla this last spring, our historic preservation class. And I went, even before the class started, I went to the town council meeting and said, we would like to do this. Is that okay with you? I had to get the okay from them. And then we collaborated with a historic preservation committee in Mesilla to develop an architectural style book for them. We came up with some posters for them so that people who come in and want to build in Mesilla now can look at the poster in the town hall and say, this style is a style that's appropriate to preserve the historic nature of that community.
I would imagine that you run into a number of sources or a number of resources that you wouldn't be aware of in the academic community. I imagine there are people in local areas that have a lot of knowledge about their own community, about
Sure.
buildings in that area.
Sure, absolutely.
Somewhat of a very different approach, and probably some big surprises from time to time.
Absolutely. 2 years ago, we worked up in northern New Mexico in a small village called Las Trampas. And we were hired by the National Park Service, by me I mean the Public History Program at New Mexico State, hired by the National Park Service to do a survey of Las Trampas. And so we interviewed, well, we first went and did what you traditionally do, survey the buildings, talk about them, describe them, take photographs of them, show what they looked like in 1998. And I wrote that up and sent it to the people up in Las Trampas, and they sent it back and said, "You got this all wrong." And what they meant, we had a few mistakes in what we did. What they meant was we just described the shell. We just described the physical look of the building. So I said, okay, well, I'll come up there, and I interviewed 3 of the people in Las Trampas, and they said, oh, well, this house used to belong to this person and this person and this person. And one of the most surprising things was they said, and this is where they ground sugarcane. And this is up at 9,000 feet. And they grew sugarcane up there in this little agricultural valley, and they ground it with the mule going around just like in the Caribbean. And the juice comes out, and then they boiled the juice in this little kind of converted horno, and that was very surprising to me that they had sugarcane production up there.
What kind of people are drawn to public history? Is it the same type of person that would enter a traditional history program?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The person who likes their privacy, who likes to work by themselves, have a hard time in public history because it is such a community effort. And also there's a lot of public speaking involved. You have to go in front of groups of people and tell them what you would like to do and how they benefit from that, and make sure also that the communication is clear so that you don't do something that they don't like. So that's important. People who are drawn to public history are people who don't want to teach in a classroom, but love history.
Right.
So that's another aspect of it.
How did you get involved in this? What's your background in public history?
Oh goodness, how far back can I go? I guess I can jump back to, I was an actor at one point, and a comedian, and a street clown.
Oh,
so I don't have problems talking to audiences and making a fool of myself, which you sometimes do, and you have to deal with that. And then when I was living in Santa Fe in the 1980s, I was working at one time with the museum up there. So I got some museum background, which is very important for public history. Probably more public history historians work in museums than anywhere else. And then I decided to go back to school and pursue a graduate degree at UNM, and I did that. And when I was there, I was on the track for traditional historian to teach in a university. But knowing the job market, I decided I'd better be as broad a historian as I can, and I was attracted to oral history, where you go out and interview people. So I incorporated that into my course of studies, and then into my dissertation, where I interviewed children who grew up in Los Alamos. And from there, I had somewhat of a strong background in oral history, as well as museum studies and a little bit in historic preservation. And so when the job came open at New Mexico State University, I applied for it, and fortunately they hired me.
Actually, the background is not that far away as it appears. I mean, drama and comedy, acting are all involved in telling a story. History is telling a story. Exactly. Museums interpret stories in some ways, so it's a very useful background to come from. I would imagine that your program attracts people from a number of different disciplines. They don't necessarily come directly out of history studies, do they?
No. We get a lot of history majors, but we also get people from English who are interested in oral history, people from anthropology who are interested in museum studies. So people from different, it is interdisciplinary. And at New Mexico State, the courses are also taught not just by history professors, but by English professors, anthropology professors, several anthropology professors, things like that.
How did the program at New Mexico State evolve? How long have they offered a public history program there?
Public history has been a component there since 1984. So it's been a while.
Sure.
Yeah, and it is one of the older programs, I think, in the country. I mean, there are definitely older programs, but this is one of the older ones. And it's also one of the only ones in the Rocky Mountain area. So that's something. And we get students not just from this region, not just from West Texas and New Mexico, but we have a student in there who's from India. We have a lot of students that are snowbirds from the north who are trying to escape the harsh winters up there and come down to.
And what's your role as program director? What kinds of things do you do?
I administrate the program, which means I make sure that the graduate students enrolled in it are progressing in their course of studies in a timely manner. I write grants so that we can get money to do field work and to do those extra things that aren't covered by normal coursework. And then I also teach. I teach oral history, historic preservation, heritage tourism, historical editing. Those are the main courses that I teach in public history. And then once in a while I do teach an American history class.
You mentioned oral history a few times as a vital part of this. Is there a method to it? Is there a way to do oral history that's different than simply going out and talking to people? How do you do oral history?
You have to prepare, you have to research the person, and say if I was doing an oral history of you, there are no books written about you, right?
Yet.
Yet, right. And so it's challenging to go out and do the research on somebody. One thing we do is talk to the families and talk to friends, and usually the family will say, oh, you have to ask them about that episode in their life. But you do some in-depth research into the person. You also do research into the community that they lived in and the times that they lived through. So somebody who, say, was in the Army in Vietnam, well, you want to know a little bit about their experience in Vietnam and if they were in combat or in supply or whether they actually were under fire, and if they were under fire, where, so that you could talk and have a meaningful discussion with them about that.
And these are generally interviews that you tape record or take notes or?
No, tape record.
Generally
because
tape
this
record.
then becomes part of the historic record.
Oh, I see.
We deposit it at the archives on campus, the Rio Grande Historical Collection, or sometimes in other archives around the region, so that future historians can come, listen to those interviews, and do their own research. So we are actually providing primary sources or providing this raw data that future historians can come back and do the research and interpret history in the future.
There's been a lot of talk lately about heritage tourism, and there's a number of projects that are going on in our area that are connected to that. I imagine this ties in very closely with some of the projects that people are pursuing in your program. What exactly is heritage tourism?
Heritage tourism is using the history of a place to try to attract tourists. And so, say up in Lincoln, they are very effective in using the Billy the Kid history to bring tourists to Lincoln. Santa Fe uses the heritage not just of all of the people who have lived in the region for millennia. So people who come to Santa Fe, tourists who come to Santa Fe, want to see Native American ruins, want to get a taste for Hispanic American culture, as well as probably see some of the arts and cultures that have developed over this century.
Is there a lot of potential here in southern New Mexico and West Texas for heritage tourism, or is this something that's more applicable to other areas?
I think there is. I think there is. I mentioned Lincoln. I mean, that's a big draw. People are fascinated with the legend of Billy the Kid. And Billy the Kid was in Mesilla as well. That's where he was on trial. So Mesilla can use, and they do use their heritage in that regards. I think that it's a little bit tricky, though, because the time period, the season when most people are out traveling is the summer, is the summer months. So to attract tourists, I think this region has to market it a little bit different. They have to market for the snowbirds. And families, yes, maybe over the vacations of Christmas and Easter, but I think there's a problem with attracting people to stay in this region during the hot summer months.
Exactly. What kinds of things do you see as untapped resources here? What types of things do you think could be developed for tourism in some way, connected with that heritage tourism theme?
Yeah. I think the Hispanic heritage of this region is very important, has rich history. We just celebrated 400 years of Spanish influence in this region with Don Juan de Oñate passing right by here in 1598. And because this is a border region too, I mean, this is a very lively part of the country. There's a lot of cultural exchange going on. The border just isn't at the Rio Grande. You know that, or your viewers know that. Up in Las Cruces, where I'm from, I mean, that's part of the border.
Sure.
South of Juarez is part of the border. I mean, there's no, that's just a political line. So this is a very lively place where the culture of the future is taking shape here as these two cultures intermingle and adapt and figure out how to live together.
Are there any particular sites that you think are prime for development at this point? Any particular places that would draw people?
The missions, and you've done a program recently on the Socorro mission.
Sure.
I think those missions are very important. And that goes along with the Camino Real. I think the Camino Real is also ripe for interpretation for heritage tourists who are coming here looking for a glimpse of the past and kind of an authentic view of the past. There's one other area, let me skip to something totally different for heritage tourism, and that's the fact that this region has been involved with the aerospace industry longer than probably any other region in the country. Werner von Braun was brought here from Germany with his German scientists to White Sands Missile Range. Goddard in Roswell fired off some of the first rockets in the 1930s. So there's been a lot of work done in the aerospace industry in this region. So that I think, and even though that's more recent history,
Sure.
I think that's a heritage that continues to fascinate the American public.
We haven't really done much with it in this area. Outside of the museum in Alamogordo is all I can think of that really offers that, and that's a very rich area for development. Mexico, does Mexico tie into any of the projects or any of the things that your students have looked at?
Sure. There are some projects that are being done jointly with the National Park Service and INA, the similar organization in Mexico, the Institute of History and Archaeology. So there's some collaboration that's starting to develop, and particularly around the Camino Real.
And the Camino Real is, of course, a highway in a sense, a royal highway that was in use for hundreds of years and connected the area of Santa Fe all the way down through El Paso, city of Chihuahua, onto Mexico City. And this has recently drawn a lot of attention within the last 5 or 6 years. There's projects along that Camino Real. So,
There's also some development of going to Spain and marketing this region to Spain. And that makes a lot of sense. For people who are traveling in Spain to come to this part of the world and find out the Spanish influence, investigate it, hear about it over the last 400 years, that could be an untapped market.
what kind of degree does your program offer? Students that might be interested in public history. We have a lot of students that are interested in history and they're not sure whether to go into teaching fields or some other areas. What kind of degree program do you have there at New Mexico?
We offer a master's program in history with an emphasis on public history. And we require students, it's a 2-year program. It can be longer, but
Sure.
you can also do it in 2 years if you put your nose to the grindstone. And we require students to take about half public history courses and then half traditional history courses. To become a good public historian, you have to be a good historian. There's also a component where we have you do an internship, usually in the summer between the 2 years. And students have done internships in the last few years at Yosemite National Park, being park rangers, leading guided tours through the park. Last summer, a student did an internship at the National Women's Rights National Park, and she helped with taking oral histories of the descendants of the signers of the Declaration of Sentiment. the beginning of the women's rights movement in the United States, as well as putting on some conferences. People do internships closer at home at the Farm and Ranch Museum in Las Cruces, at Fort Selden, Columbus, places like that. So it's a variety of places where students can do their internships.
What kind of jobs, what kinds of careers are open to people with a master's in public history?
Well, you can get a job with the master's probably a little easier than you can get a job with the PhD, especially in public history. You can get jobs in museums, and several of our students are working at the Farm and Ranch Museum. You can also get jobs in archives because part of public history is collecting the information, the historical information that people have in their attics or in their cellars, and they just bring it to archive and say, here it is, and then somebody has to go through and process it, make it ready for researchers. So one of our students is working at the Arizona State Archives.
And locally, what kinds of projects have students done in this immediate area? What things have they studied as part of their program?
We did a survey of Columbus, of the historic buildings in Columbus, which Pancho Villa and his Villistas attacked on March 9th, 1916. And that's part of the National Park Service Historic District, so the Park Service hired us to do that. I've also helped the Heritage Preservation Alliance in New Mexico to identify the most endangered historic places in New Mexico. That was a fun project that we started last year. We're going to continue it this year. And we have the public send in their applications, and they send in sometimes their own buildings, and saying this is endangered, this is why it's endangered, this is also why it's historically significant. We chose 11 last year, and they run the gamut from the church at Acoma to the first site that Don Juan de Oñate and his settlers settled north of Española, railroad depots around New Mexico, a toll house on the Santa Fe Trail near Las Vegas, the Mesilla Historic District, the ghost town at Shakespeare, Waterworks building at Silver City. It's a wide variety. And we ended up with the Manhattan Project buildings in New Mexico that helped create the atomic bomb, and then the night sky of New Mexico. We felt was an endangered historic place.
You've had some people take a look at some things in El Paso as well. I understand that some people are looking at the missions and
Yes.
keeping track of some of the work out there.
One of our students is working with Cornerstone's Community Partnerships that restores churches in the region. They restored the church in Doña Ana, and then they are now working in Socorro. So Sandy Marshall, the student, is working with Pat Taylor and Cornerstones this last summer on an internship, and she's helping to restore that structure.
What do you see for the future of public history studies in this area? Do you think it's going to be a growing field, something we should encourage our students to pursue?
I do. The public's fascinated with history. The History Channel, the Discovery Channel, the history programs on public TV, art and entertainment, they all have history programs. Public loves to go out to museums as well. And they're also, if you think about public history as also part of community preservation. You go out and you interview the elders of your community. You interview them about the events, the history. You also interview them about the language that might be changing. Public history can be part of heritage preservation.
I would imagine this builds interest in the community as well. People that weren't aware of what some of these buildings may have been or what their uses were at one time, just by the fact that you're taking a look at them and gathering information on them attracts attention as well. Any particular fields of study that a student might want to pursue in their undergraduate education that might prepare them particularly well for public history?
Well, reading and writing is basic.
Sure.
I have to, and I still am improving my skills in that. So that's something that everybody can continue to improve in. Also, history and researching, how you research, work with primary sources. So that's all history stuff. But also possibly public speaking. A little bit different.
Communications is a key part of this.
Yes.
Dealing with the community, I can see that as a very important skill to develop.
Yeah, and with public history, with the increase in TV, in channels in TV that want history programming, possibly media as well.
Communication skills again,
Yeah,
sure.
communication skills again.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you for coming here and telling us a little bit about the public history program at New Mexico State. And maybe we can have you come back sometime and tell us a little bit about your work in Santa Fe. I understand that you've done a lot of interesting things there as well. And we want to thank you for joining us this evening on Along the Rio Grande. And we hope to see you all along the Rio Grande. This is George Torok. Thank you.